Welcome to my review of The Legend of Vox Machina, episodes 1, 2, and 3, spoiler-free. I am TL Painter, and I'm not wearing pants. Instead of focusing and talking about every single episode individually, because that would take forever, I'm just going to talk about how I feel about the batch in general, and then I'll give you a star rating for each of the 3 episodes that came out at the end of the video. So first, let's talk about what The Legend of Vox Machina is, if you somehow have no idea at all. The Legend of Vox Machina is based on the first campaign of Critical Role, which is an actual play Dungeons & Dragons show that you can find on Twitch. It is run by Matthew Mercer and has a host of voice actors all participating as players. It's a lot of fun. I myself am a big fan of Critical Role, so when I sat down to watch this show, I actually wasn't totally certain what it is I was going to get. I was a little iffy on how I would feel about the show. On one hand, I loved the story in the first campaign. I thought it was really well told and compelling and very well improvised and performed, but at the same time, I know that it is incredibly complex and has a lot of depth and spanned several hours of gameplay, and we are now trying to condense it into one season, and that is a huge undertaking. I cannot imagine the amount of work that went into trying to condense this story arc down into just about 10 episodes or so is what we're going to get for the Briarwood arc. But we get to the Briarwood arc later on in the season. Instead, we start off with something that is more focused on a character introduction. Yes, we do draw some from the first campaign to do the character introduction, and we run through a very quick plot line, but the problem with that is that the plot line really shouldn't have been as quick as it was. It felt very rushed in those first couple of episodes, and there wasn't really a lot of time for the story to ruminate, and everything just felt like it happened too quickly. Yeah, we got some good moments with the characters, and I really feel like that was the point of those first 2 episodes, so it did accomplish its goal in that sense. We really understand each of the individual characters and also how they work together as a group, or how they flounder together as a group, I suppose. So for that, they did a good job. You understand the characters. Even if you aren't really a fan of Critical Role, I feel like after the second episode, you will probably have a pretty solid grasp on each of the individual characters and their personalities, as well as how the group itself functions. They did a pretty good job on that front, but the actual story in those first 2 episodes was not very solid and was pretty rushed. In addition to the story being rushed, I feel like some of the art and animation in the first 2 episodes was a little bit rushed as well. Maybe not in all parts, but in several moments there are some obviously missing frames that kind of draw you out of the animation. I know that missing frames are a thing in animation and that it's generally intentional. I mean, it's not like they didn't know the frames were missing here, but for me, it didn't really work in the favor of the animation and appearance of the first couple of episodes. Especially in a couple of early scenes in the show, some of the missing frames and sort of choppy animation made it almost look like it was a little unfinished or unpolished, and that's not really a good look for the first couple episodes of a show. But by episode 3, I feel like it got a little bit better and it wasn't taking me out of it so much. I personally think that the weirdest, I don't want to say worst because it wasn't bad animation, but the weirdest animation is actually going to be the beast in episode 1. I don't want to spoil what it is, especially for people who have never watched Critical Role and are just going to watch the show. The way that they did the beast, it really looked like what they did was, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did this, and I imagine they did it for several things in the show because it is a pretty common trick that you can use in animation and it's totally viable. I have no issues with it being done, but essentially you create a 3D model, rig it, animate it, and then you apply some filters and things to make it look like it is 2-dimensional to go well with the other components that you were animating in the show. The problem is that the beast didn't really animate in the same way as everyone else and didn't look the same way as everyone else that was fighting it. So what you get is a really cool looking monster that has all of these really awesome animations, but at the same time, compared to everything else that's around it, it almost looks uncanny and like it doesn't belong, like it was just pasted in there at the last minute. Oh, who is texting me? What? Stop. But it didn't really match up with the scenery around it or the other characters who were interacting with the beast, and the result was something that looked a little bit uncanny and really unbelievable compared to everything else around it. Yeah, I think that the beast looked awesome, and there were some really cool animations and effects around it that just looked almost, mind-blowing in some of these respects. And yet, despite how awesome some of that looked, all I was really thinking about during those scenes was this beast doesn't look like it belongs in the show. So that was one of my main complaints. But all of these issues really kind of get fixed by episode 3. I did notice a couple of other very slightly janky things in the 3rd episode as far as the appearance is concerned, but they were so minor that I'm not going to let it detract from the score of that episode. So the first couple of episodes, I feel like they were a little bit rough in the story department and in the appearance department, but everything else, I feel like the first couple episodes were fine. I probably enjoyed the first episode more than the second one by quite a bit because the second one is the conclusion of that storyline. So the first one is a great introduction to the storyline they're telling in the first couple of episodes, but then the conclusion of it is so rushed and immediate that it just really didn't do do all that much for me. And then we also had so many moments with the Beast in the second episode, and the result was me just kind of feeling meh after episode 2, but then we get to episode 3, and episode 3 really blew my expectations out of the water. This was an awesome episode. It had so many memorable scenes from the first campaign, things that have been cemented in my mind for a long time, which I think is pretty impressive because I barely remember some of the things that have happened in my own campaigns, let alone somebody else's. But there are some really cool scenes in the Briarwood arc, which is what they're adapting for season 1, and they did those really well. I think that they knew what scenes were going to be most iconic for viewers, and they picked those out and said, we need to make sure that these are in this episode, and it was fantastic. And Taliesin's performance as Percy, really, as always, I love Taliesin, but it was awesome. I loved what he did, and it was fantastic. Again, it was really him recapturing some of just the magic from the first campaign and some of the trauma that Percy has. And Percy was a really dark character in campaign 1, and I feel like Taliesin tapped into that really well in the 3rd episode of season 1. So the 3rd episode definitely better than the first 2, and I think it did a really good job of setting up a longer arc. So if this 3rd episode is a sign of just how good this season is going to get, I am really excited for the next few batches to drop until we get to the final 12th episode. I think it's 12 episodes in season 1. So this 3rd episode, awesome, and I feel like it really sets the tone of the show in an excellent way. The animation was a lot better in episode 3 than it was in the first couple, and the story was better told and not as rushed. So I really enjoyed the 3rd episode the most out of this first batch. One other thing that I wanted to touch on that is kind of a praise for me, because this is something that I've really come to appreciate in shows, is they had the gore and the sex right up front. Like within the first 1 or 2 minutes of this show, you knew what you were in for by watching the show. And I think that is what a lot of shows need to do. Instead of saving it for when you're halfway through the first season, you throw all this at the viewer and suddenly the viewer's like, oh, I can't handle this. Now I've wasted all this time because I'm not going to be able to watch the rest of the show. Putting all of that stuff at the front tells the viewer, hey, this is what you're in for. This is what the show's about. This is the kind of content that's going to be in the show. If you can't handle it from this point, you might as well just turn it off here. And I think that that is a really solid thing for shows to be doing. Oh no. Great. And I think this is something that a lot more shows should do instead of waiting for way later on in the season to show a viewer who probably can't handle some things like that. This is really gory, it is violent and raunchy. I mean, this really does feel more like a group of people who are playing Dungeons and Dragons than it does feel like an actual fantasy show. And I feel like that is the kind of the vibe that they were going for here. They know who their audience is, and they know that their audience tunes into Critical Role to watch people play Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, the story is great, but you're there to watch people play. And this really kind of feels like watching some people play Dungeons and Dragons. The banter and the lack of coordination between the team members, it all feels very Dungeons and Dragons-y, and I feel like they really captured that quite well in this first batch of episodes. And now I want to get to my overall rating for the first 3 episodes of The Legend of Vox Machina. But before I do that, I just want to let you know that you can like, comment, and subscribe all for free. Wow, who would have thought? And all of that really helps me out as I try to grow this channel, so I greatly appreciate your support in that way. And now let's get to my ratings. So my overall rating for each of the 3 episodes in The Legend of Vox Machina's first batch. So for episode 1, I'm going to go ahead and give it 3 stars. I feel like it was a solid introduction, but it was pretty lacking in several areas. And then episode 2 was even worse than that in that it was so incredibly rushed in the story. I'm going to go ahead and give that one 2 stars. Then we get to the 3rd episode, the final episode of the first batch, and this one was amazing. It was so well done. There were a couple of bumps along the road, and I believe that there's still plenty of room for improvement, but it was excellent, and I loved Percy, especially in this episode. I'm going to go ahead and give episode 3 4 stars. And that is my overall rating for The Legend of Vox Machina's first 3 episodes. I'm going to be reviewing the next batch, hopefully next Monday. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out this video. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to see another video from me, you can do so by clicking up here. And until next time, bye.